and welcome to Wake Up and Live with the Arts. I'm James McGilbray, along with our videographer Lester Bryant Sr. Sue Johnson is recuperating from some difficult challenges and injuries that she's had, but she's here in spirit. So hello to Sue, and we'll try and hold down the fort until you're back. Meanwhile, it's a pleasure to introduce you to someone that you've met before on the show. In fact, recently we had this guest on the show along with my sister, Gwendolyn Boulware. And I'm talking, of course, about the gentleman to my immediate left, Mr. Roy Richardson. How are you today, sir?
Thanks, sir.
All right. It's so good always to see you. And we have something very special to talk with you about today. When we got together a couple of weeks ago at the Karamu Theater, part of it was just kind of to touch base and say hello. Part of it was, to give my sister the honor of meeting you. And by the way, she was absolutely thrilled to meet you. And so thank you for doing that. But today, we want to talk about something that's coming up that's going to be special for the entire population, especially for young people. And that's a book that you're getting ready to have published. Tell me, first of all, what's the name of the book, and tell the audience what it's going to be about.
Well, there's 45, 50, maybe more books already written about the Tuskegee Airmen. Mm-hmm. It's hard to write anything new. A lot of it is repetition. But then again, there's some of the experiences that I had that have not been written, and I try to stay away from what's already been said. A lot of things people didn't know about, the public didn't know about it, and the government didn't want you to know, was that we were America's Black Air Force.
Right.
And there's nothing published by the government or publicized. So when the war was over and all the troops were returning home, and they had all these parades and coming down the main streets of New York and so forth, all the confetti, and I blew about it, soldiers marching down the road. When you come off the ship, there's a big wide platform, and they had a rope down the middle of that platform. Big sign on the end that says, "White troops over here." What do they call them? Colored troops at that time.
Really?
Over this side. And one of the fellas, Crockett said, after all this overseas fighting and so forth, and when you got back here to the United States, nothing's changed.
Well, and the thing is that those pilots and the people that were involved in what they call the Tuskegee Experiment made a huge contribution to the war effort. They flew these planes and everyone knew them as the Red Tails.
Well, everyone didn't know them as the Red Tails. At the beginning of the war, the only planes, the government only had 2 planes that were capable of combat, the P-38 and the P-40.
Okay.
And Charlie Dryden, he's a lieutenant colonel, he just passed recently, but he called them the flying coffins. And
really?
Oh yeah, they were inferior to the German aircraft because Germany had already, they were prepared for war. And they had the technology and the equipment and all the latest knowledge about flying airplanes and how to compete in the combat and so forth. The P-39, P-38, it was unsuitable. It was, first of all, it had a door on it like an automobile. And if you got in trouble and you try and open it, the wind was pushing it back. So it was hard to get out of. Not only that, it water-cooled engine, least infraction to hit the radiators and the motor would seize up just like that. And it had engine behind the pilot seat. The 30-millimeter cannon went from the drive shaft. Drive shaft went through your legs up to the front of the propeller.
All right.
And there was a 30-millimeter cannon in there that came out from the front. It was just
not suitable.
No. And then the P-40, it was the second plane, and those two planes were not red tails. They knew nothing about any red tails. And a lot of the fellas died in those planes and never heard of the red tails. The red tails didn't start until the P-47 and the P-51s. P-47s were before the P-51s. When they were transferred over to Europe, some of the fellas started painting their tails red. But when the Mustangs came in, all the Mustangs had red tails.
Well, and see, that's the reason that I asked the question, because the title of your book kind of goes to that point. Tell the audience what the title of the book is.
The title of my book is Before the Tails Were Red.
Exactly.
And I have a lot of names of the fellas that died while fighting in these inferior planes. And you won't believe some of the tails that they had, like Chubby Taylor from Pittsburgh. And he had trouble with his plane, P-38. And he was trying to get out of the plane. He finally got out of the plane. He bailed out, but his parachute didn't open. So he went in the ground. And then there's fellas, they're flying so low over the water. And that's the worst thing in the world, flying over water, because the least thing, the plane, the temperature has a tendency to get the plane either up or down. And
that was one of the things that they had to do, as I understand it, because they were escorting.
Well, they were
not.
They were trying to stay under the radar.
Okay.
And a lot of times they get too low, and the plane would dip and hit the water. If you hit the water, you're going. Oh.
But now, what was the role that these pilots played in the war effort? In other words, let's focus. You mentioned the title of the book, Before the Tails Were Red.
Yeah.
What were these pilots doing that was different from when the P-47s, I guess you said, were being used?
All the planes practiced that maneuver.
Okay.
See, in your practice, over here in the States, they had practices where they didn't want to see any planes above 100 feet, 50 feet.
I see.
And a lot of times while on a practice run, we come to a point where the buildings are much higher than 50 feet. Some of them didn't know what to do, the bridges. A lot of them didn't know whether to go above it, the bridges or what, but they just flew under the bridge.
But now, if they were using these inferior planes, how were they able to accomplish their missions?
Well, in the States while you're in training, a lot of this was in training, but see, a lot of them, out of 1,030 something that applied for the Tuskegee Airmen. There were 932 that completed the course, but it was a program that was designed to fail, and most of the big brass were strictly against it. They didn't want it, and they figured it wasn't going to pass anyway. So that's why that was the name of the Tuskegee Experiment.
Right.
And the only thing is, the biggest mistake they made was that they recruited from 7 different black colleges. And they picked the cream of the crop. Okay. The guys weren't any dummies. There was West Virginia State, Hampton, Morehouse eventually came in, Tuskegee, North Carolina, AT&T, school in Greensboro, I can't remember. Oh, North Carolina, AT&T, and Tuskegee. That was an institute at the time. It wasn't a college. And so altogether it was 7 black colleges. And a white student from high school, he could apply for the program for, in fact, Roosevelt, President Roosevelt, fearing that the United States might be drawn into the war. He had the vision that he might need all the pilots he could get. So he started a program, CPTP, Civilian Pilot Training Program.
Okay.
And he would train pilots, young pilots, high school students, and seniors, and young college students to fly airplanes on government expense, learn how. And black students, when they finally did petition them to get into the program, they had to have 2 years of college.
Yeah.
So,
but then in so doing, they were very qualified.
they were not only qualified, they were,
Overqualified.
like I say, the cream of the crop.
Well, so now, is the focus of the book that's coming out, and again, it's before the tales were read, is it on the stories of those pilots who were flying in the planes before the red tails? Is that really the focus?
Well, most of the pilots trained at the same time. Same place, same instructors, same classes. But the only thing is that the date of graduation, when they called your name, and he would give you your commission, so-and-so, second lieutenant, and cadet so-and-so, flight officer. Well, all of them trained at the same time, same place. But the only thing is, flight officer didn't get paid as much as a second lieutenant.
Right.
And eventually they eliminated that flight officer thing. A flight officer was like the chief warrant officer. And there was about 5 different grades, 4 or 5 different grades of warrant officers. So a flight officer was in between a master sergeant and a second lieutenant. But now it's they eliminated that. You can't even find one in store that sells military gear.
But now,
badge.
well, I'm curious though, what is the difference in the stories that you're going to tell in your book before the tales were read from those that we came to know about, after movies like Red Tails and some of these? In other words, what distinguishes the book that you're about to have released from the other books that are out there?
Well, there were 66 pilots killed in action. And, well, between the combat, the ones killed in training and so forth, but the 66 were killed in that combat. Then there was more killed in training. And it's kind of hard to say how they were killed. Some were shot down. There was a lot shot down, but the patriots in the different countries would rescue them, and the ones that were rescued, they would shelter them until they could get back to the friendly lands. So it's kind of a hectic story. I know two of them that were Alexander Jefferson from Detroit and Richard Macon, he was from Detroit also. Both of them were captured, and they were POWs. And the Alexander, he went on a combat mission to protect the bombers. The bombers never showed up. So on the way back, they were flying 150, 200 feet above the ground, 400 miles an hour. And the ground fire came through Alexander's plane, right through the bottom of the plane. It went out the cockpit at the top, right between his legs. Alex would go back on the stick, and the plane shot straight up in the air. Well, when he got as high as he could go, about 900 feet. You have to have 1,000 feet to bail out of a plane. You should have, before your parachute to open. But when he got as high as he could go, he just threw the cockpit back, flipped the plane over, and dropped straight down.
Huh.
And while he's floating down, the German soldiers are sitting there looking at him, waiting for him. And when he come down, he surrounded him and arrested him.
Now, but was he shot down because he was flying one of those inferior planes, or?
No, he was in a Mustang P-51.
Okay, well, I guess my question then is, since your focus is on the pilots who had to fly before these red tails,
Well,
what is it that you want the people to know that they might not know because it predates the red tails?
well, the thing is, what I'm trying to get over is that those two particular planes was the only thing the government had. Now, they always improved the planes. And when they got to the point where P-40, that was out way before the war.
Mm-hmm.
Claire Chennault, he had those planes with volunteer pilots, white pilots, over in China. And they were fighting over in China way before World War II started. So these planes were relics.
And why did they, I mean, in other words, if they were flying these old relics, eventually they proved...
modern German planes, Messerschmitt was, he run circle around these planes.
Well, then, did they end up in the better planes eventually because they proved themselves as pilots, or what was the reason for the service finally getting them out of these really bad planes and putting them in the red tails?
Well, although the planes were old, worn out relics, they managed to hold their own. And as the weeks and months went by, they were developing new planes. And when new planes came out, they transferred so many planes over, transfer so many planes over, and put the other ones out of commission.
Okay.
And then not only that, they had the women flying the planes across from the manufacturing plants here in the States over to overseas. The women flew all those planes overseas, from the fighter planes to the bombers.
Well, and I think that most people aren't aware that women were involved to that degree then.
Well, all the men were drafted or serving in the war. They didn't have any men to fly the planes over, so they trained the women to, I forgot the name of the women, but they never got recognition, and they didn't serve as military, the government military people. They were individual women that trained to learn how to fly airplanes.
Okay.
And they just flew, as they came off the assembly lines, they flew them over.
Well, and with that, we're going to take a brief break, and we're going to come back and talk with Roy about the importance of women who were involved with the Tuskegee Airmen, because you hear the term airmen all the time, but it's so important to understand that there were women involved. And also we're going to talk about why this book is being written in terms of what we don't know, not just people in general, but especially young people who might be serving now or thinking about serving. So when we come back, we're going to take this up. You're watching Wake Up and Live with the Arts with me, James McGilbray, and Roy Richardson. And we're back with Roy Richardson, our special guest today, talking about his upcoming book, Before the Tales Were Read. And we had previously mentioned that there was a difference between the red tails and those Tuskegee Airmen who flew very inferior planes prior to these better planes coming online. And we'd also spoken about the fact that there weren't just Tuskegee Airmen, but there were Tuskegee Airwomen. And so, Roy, what did the women do as a part of their contribution to this effort?
Well, people don't know. They have no idea that we had 4 squadrons of women, the Tuskegee Women, and they did everything but fly the planes. They didn't fly the planes. Although some of the women had license to fly, but at that time, the government didn't allow it. And they had women as lawyers, doctors, pharmacists, cooks, mechanics, parachute riggers, radio control operators, these people in the air traffic controllers, mechanics. They worked on the trucks.
They did a little bit of everything.
They did everything, and they were good. They were very good.
And how much do you discuss their roles in the book that's coming out?
Well, a lot of things I wanted to, especially like the parachute shack. I wanted the picture of the parachute shack in the book so people can understand what a parachute shack looked like. It wasn't just a big square building. It was like a Quonset hut, a small Quonset hut that was round. It was long, with tables where they could stretch out the parachutes, repack them, and so forth. And then there was another building, same thing, type that could that served as the officers' club for the 302nd Fighter Squadron. So, and that was loaded all the time.
Okay.
But you can't. It's hard to explain without a picture to focus in your mind.
And there will be pictures in the book to the extent that you're able to.
If we can go online and find one comparable to it, because the pictures that I have were copyrighted.
Well, then let me just mention this, and I'm going to throw this out to our audience. If you are aware of photos in particular that involve the women who were in the Tuskegee Project. If you have unique photos that you might like to have shared with the public and would give permission to do so, contact us at wakeupandlives.org and our website and our email address. We'll put that information on the screen, because to the extent that maybe we can crowdsource some of these photos and some of the things that Roy might be able to use in the book, which is coming out in this summer, correct?
Yeah, the end of June, 1st of July, somewhere around there.
Then, contact us soon. And let us know if you have photos that you might give Roy permission to use. There's still time to get them in the book, and we would be excited to hear from you. This book is really focused on educating people about things that are not in the public domain, as it were, because clearly there was a lot of things the government didn't bother to mention about the Tuskegee Airmen. There were a lot of things that can only be told from the point of view of someone who experienced it. And so who do you hope will read your book more than any others? Are there particular people out there that this book is geared toward?
Well, it's just that it's hard to say who will read the book. I try and encourage the young students that's still in school. In fact, I believe that all young men should be part of the United States service, because it teaches them discipline and how to live with one another without getting into quite a bit of trouble. And
what about women? What about women?
Well, women, right now, women are just as well off as the young men, because there's so many young women today that are being promoted. When I went to, I used to work through the conventions all the time, and once a year, first week of August, and when I get there, I'd see all these women in military, women in uniform, and that was something you never saw before.
Well, and as it so happens, of course, you met my sister,
I met your sister. She's
at one of the conventions.
She was going up for colonel.
Yeah, she almost made it there. There was an issue with someone having a month's seniority, and they were stationed in the same place, and he got the promotion, but she went in, enlisted.
Well, there's one thing about the military. You have to be a colonel in order to be in charge of an air base. Mm-hmm. Colonel Davis, he got 3 promotions in one day. He was a senior member. Back then it was segregated and everything, and by him being the top officer, he went from captain, major, lieutenant colonel, and full bird colonel in one day.
One day.
Well, he was already a captain.
Right.
But
well, my sister was in for 32 years. It took her to get almost
when I was there,
point.
you couldn't buy a promotion. I mean, promotions are unheard of. And the thing is, each base are required to have so many assignments to it. You can have so many colonels, you can have more than one colonel, I think, I'm not sure. But majors, captains, lieutenants, second lieutenants, sergeants, you only allowed so many
right.
on one base. And when someone retire, quit, or deceased, then they can fill that spot. And when I was, like I say, when I was there, you couldn't buy a promotion. And then Span Watson, he ended up a lieutenant colonel, but he was second lieutenant for I don't know how many years because he was so controversial. And he was in the first part, I don't know, first, second, or third. He wasn't in the first class. He was in the second or third class. But he was so outspoken. Same way with Chappie James. Chappie James was my commanding officer when I was there. And he was the first lieutenant at the time. He was the last person in the world I thought would become a general. B.O. Davis, Benjamin O. Davis, he was the first black general in the Air Force. Well, it wasn't the Air Force, it was Army Air Corps.
Right.
And then Chappie James was the first black four-star general in the Air Force.
And you're going to tell all of these stories
Yes.
in your book.
Yes.
One thing that occurred to me, Roy mentioned, and for the audience out there, the goal is to help to educate young people and inform them of some of the things that aren't necessarily taught even in their history classes, and you don't see it in the media. The other thing that occurred to me, and tell me what you think about this, Roy. There are so many immigrants that come to this country, and they have their own unique histories, and often are not aware of some of the discrimination, some of the issues that African Americans faced, even just to serve this country.
That's right.
And so, to what extent do you think that an immigrant population, Hispanics coming in from South and Central and Latin America, Africans coming in, from all over the continent, Asians, so many people who don't know the history. How might they benefit from reading your book?
Well, if they read it.
Well, and that's the idea. Is we want to make sure that they're aware of it and will pick it up because they feel that it's going to benefit them. So
But the thing is, when you travel south, and all these black colleges down south, you talk about the Tuskegee Airmen, all of them know about the Tuskegee Airmen. Up here in the north, some of them never heard of them. But that's the difference between the black population down south and the black population in the north.
But do you think that an immigrant would better appreciate African Americans as a people if they understood the struggle in this regard that you and others like you went through, that now they don't have to even think about, because you want to go into the Army, you want to go into the Air Force, you want to go into the Navy, the Marines, you simply have to be able to qualify and do the work. It isn't about whether you're black or white or Asian or Hispanic.
Well, first they have to become a citizen.
Yes.
I don't know how long it'll take for them to do that.
Well, but people can serve in the Air Force or in the military without necessarily being citizens. They can have green cards and all of these kinds of things too.
Well, that's true too. But because there's some fellows that were in there that were in the military, but they were deported. They wanted to deport them, although they had served in the Marines and Army and so forth. And had fought in some of the wars. So it's kind of a toss-up there.
Well, I'm hoping, and for our audience as we begin to wrap up here, I'm hoping that this is the type of book that young people will pick up because they become fascinated by what has preceded them, especially if they're considering service to the country. And similarly, people who don't understand the history of discrimination in this country and how African Americans in particular had to fight just for the opportunity to serve, to understand that struggle and to appreciate what it means to have that opportunity now. I'm hoping that all of these people will pick up your book and read it and grow in appreciation for the contribution that you and those who were associated with you made, and understand why now they have these opportunities. Roy, It's always a pleasure speaking with you. I can't wait to see the book. And again, for those watching this episode now, if you'll contact the Wake Up and Live Actors Studio, if you have photos, remembrances, information, pictures in particular, that you might be able to contribute to this effort as Roy goes for publication, please contact us. And again, the information is on the screen for you to get in touch, and we'll certainly make sure to forward that information to Roy. Roy, thank you so much for being with us today. Best wishes, and we'll look forward to talking with you soon about the success of the book.
Okay, fine.
And with that, again, we're going to take a break, and we're going to bring a very special guest on the show now. It's a little bit of a surprise, maybe even to the guest. Stay tuned.